Hey everyone, my name is Kedma Ough, as you know, dubbed the Small Business Superhero, and I am delighted to be connecting today with Jaime Lizotte with Comply Right. I'm excited to hear a lot from her, but before we begin, Jaime, I'd love for you to share a little bit about you, your role, and your company.
Hi, Kedma. It's so great to see you today. Thank you so much. So I am actually the HR and Tax Compliance Solutions Manager at Comply Right, and I've been in the HR industry for over 10 years now, particularly a product manager, but I also was an HR manager for about 7 or 8 years, and recently just obtained my Human Resource Development Master's degree. So I am all HR in all arenas, and now I work directly with the in-house legal team at Comply Right to develop products and work on next generation HR products that small to medium-sized businesses, or really even any business, can use to make sure that their business is compliant when it comes to employment laws. We kind of try to remove that burden for those businesses so that they can focus on what they need to focus on building their business and getting their business to grow.
Wow, that was a lot there. And you know, when we listen and we watch, we hear things like compliance, laws. Before we kick off, because I have so many questions that I would love to know, and I know my audience would love to know, can you just give a framework of, do you believe it's changed how HR has looked in the past versus what it looks like today? I'm just curious before we kick off with some really cool questions.
Yeah, definitely. HR 10 years ago is totally different than what it is today. And it's amazing at how it has changed, and how it's progressed in a positive way. HR, it used to be called personnel. They had many different names, whereas now you're seeing it more in businesses as the HR partner, where they're considering HR as a business partner in the business. And you really need to make sure that you have in your company HR aligned with your business propositions and your business goals in order to be able to achieve success as a business as a whole. So they've really made that step away from just being the one that manages the employees, but the one that really plays a role in helping your business to become successful.
Gosh, I am so glad I asked that question, because now I'm going to remember that. The HR partner. It sounds so, such an easy term, but it really just resonates for me. The HR partner, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So as we kick it off, one of the things that's really important for me and I'm really passionate about is this idea of serving small businesses. And, I'm kind of a unicorn because I've worked with over 10,000 entrepreneurs across every type of business you can imagine. And, one of the questions that really comes up is there really a difference between doing HR for a large corporation like an Apple and Intel versus a small business? And when I think small business, according to SBA, it's 500 employees or less that are classified as small business. But I work with companies that have 10 employees, 50 employees, 100 employees. And also, do they have to have an HR person on staff to actually make it work? So that's a two-part question.
Sure. So first question, is there a difference between doing HR for a large corporation versus a small business? Let me go ahead and address that. And there are definitely many differences when it comes to HR within large corporations and HR in small businesses, most definitely. And, when you think about a large corporation, HR is essentially, it's due to, it's essential in the large corporations, I should say, due to the many federal, state, even local and county laws that they need to abide by. And you think sometimes large corporations also have many locations. So now you're looking at having businesses across state lines and in multiple states. And they need to abide by those, as well as the number of employees that they need to manage. You're saying, like you mentioned, a small business is anywhere from 500 to below, but if you're 500 plus, large corporations are looking at employee numbers of 10,000 plus. So you're having to manage, it's not even one person HR, it's an actual HR department. So you're looking at adding a talent acquisition, which you have a department that's just working on recruiting those employees and maintaining those employees. An area of training and development. To make sure that all your employees are properly trained, but it also focuses on the development aspect of your employees. How are you helping them push their careers forward and keep them, maintained in your business? Now, when it comes to small businesses, a lot of times you see the owner or the office manager acting as the HR person as well. And the reason why is, I'm small, do I need somebody? It's not really that hard. It's pretty simple. I only have one employee. But with a small business, even though they don't have many employees to manage, it may seem like they don't need a full department, but they definitely need somebody that's proficient in the HR language in the HR industry. It's essential for them to understand the federal and the state laws that the business must abide by, as well as employee management, in order to make sure that they maintain that compliance. But the problem there is with small businesses, and even with some surveys that we've done, we see that the compliance level and the importance of compliance for small businesses is very low. They're not as worried about that because they're the ones that are the startups that are just really focusing on getting their business to run and getting their business grown, which it totally makes sense. But at the end of the day, if you start off on the right foot, you're going to be able to grow and you don't have anything to worry about, versus you starting off well, doing great and getting large. And now you have to go back and backtrack to make sure that now you're compliant with, 100 employees versus you starting off with one employee and starting off right and building better. So while it's definitely essential in both areas, I think there are ways that small businesses definitely can get around where they could possibly use other companies to support their compliance. There are agencies out there that help them, companies, just like ComplyRight does. But obviously, as a corporation, that is definitely essential for them to have an HR department and to be able to support the multiple arenas of HR.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. I got so many nuggets. One of the things I heard was this idea of not only compliance, but really raising the level of leadership. And I had recently saw a report right prior to the pandemic that the majority of reasons people leave, one of the top reasons, is because lack of leadership, lack of an opportunity to move up, where they feel like, I'm in this job, but I'm not going to the next level. So that is so powerful. Mm-hmm. The other thing I heard over and over again is, really, regardless of whether you have one employee or 10,000 employees, compliance is here and necessary. And you don't just get to wave it back and say, yeah, I only have 3 employees. So, we'll just put the compliance on the back burner. The reality is that it really is a requirement for everyone. Mm-hmm. So if we're thinking about that, one of the most daunting tasks I experience and I see with a lot of our employees is, what employee records do employers have to really be required to have, and also how long, does it have to be a certain amount of time? And many of the employees I work with and employers, they may have seasonal business, right? So they may have a technician come in, for a couple of months and leave. And so do they have to treat that differently than someone who's with them full time throughout the year, or is it the same?
Mm-hmm. Those are great questions. And I love this topic. It's definitely something I could go on to for an hour webinar on, because there are differences in the different types of records that you need to keep. And while I think you mentioned it at the beginning, while so mundane and probably the most boring aspect of HR, it's so important. Yes. Because, at any point, if there's if an employee complaint triggers any sort of investigation in your company, they could be in your company for an OSHA inspection or something like that. If they see that your records are not kept up to date, they could then talk to the other agency, which could then spiral and, snowball into something completely different. So it's so important. And, it is important even if you only have one employee, because it starts with one employee. That's where your employment laws kick in, is that you have to make sure that one employee knows all of their employment rights. So, employers are definitely required to keep multiple records, and it's easiest really to separate them into 5 categories. I'm going to give you a mini webinar here, let's just say.
Yes, I'm listening.
So the 5 categories you have are hiring records, I-9 forms, and our best practices is always to separate your hiring records from your I-9 forms, because if you are to get, ICE ends up investigating your company, it's best for you to just hand over the information they request and not more, because if your other records aren't up to date, you could put yourself into a whole bunch of hot water versus just giving them what they ask for. Don't give them more, The next set is financial records. We also have personnel records, and then the last one is medical records. Now, I just want to go over a little bit about what each category contains. So your hiring records would consist of job applications, job postings, any advertisements that you do for jobs, resumes, even your applicant drug test results or even employee drug test results. And employment contracts. So if you have contracts with any federal contractors, any independent contractors, you mentioned if you have somebody that's coming in only for a couple months to do work, you would definitely have to keep that information there. And all of those pieces of record information should be kept for at least 1 year. Now, the employment contract, that is different, and that should be kept for 3 years. So you're saying, okay, that person no longer works for me, but you want to keep it for the specified record keeping time, just in case anything were to happen, you have that on record to show they were an independent contractor, that you're verified they have that agreement. Now, I-9 forms, like I mentioned, you want to store those separately, and you definitely want to make sure that those are kept up to date and in compliance. I can't go into all the details, but on the record keeping piece of this, it can get a little murky and confusing. The time frame that you need to keep them is 3 years from the date of hire or 1 year after the employment ends, whichever the date is later. So you kind of have to take their hire date and their termination date and either subtract 3 years or 1 year, and whichever is later, that's to the length you want to keep it. So you may have somebody that you let go and you have to keep it for another year after. It just really depends. And you're going to see sometimes that you're going to have records for employees that are no longer with your business, but it's important to still have that information, because if anything comes up, court-wise or anything, you want to make sure that you have your bases covered as an employer. The financial records, those can consist of W-4 forms, W-9 forms, any payroll records, like a payroll status change, for instance, whether you had an employee that had to change their payroll status because they were married or divorced or had a child, and then even receipts for business expenses. So again, that could also reach out to independent contractors that are giving you receipts for expenses, things like that. All of these should be kept for 4 years, and that is with the exception of the receipts. Those should be kept for only 3 years. The other important thing about keeping your records, before I move to the next set, is you want to keep them for the time frame that you need to keep them, not longer. So you really want to make sure you follow that to a T, because if you keep it longer and they see that it's in your file and you make it available, then you're susceptible to if it's incorrect. So for an I-9, if you don't discard it, but that employee is no longer with you and your time frame for you keeping it in your records has passed, but then you get audited and you share that with them, even though that employee is no longer with you and the record time has passed, if that is incorrect, you could still get fined for it. So very important to make sure you stick to those record times to a T. Personnel records, I should say, they consist of performance evaluations, termination or layoff forms, even promotion or demotion forms, transfer or training forms, and benefit records. Now, most of these should be kept for 1 year, with the exception of the performance evaluation, and those should be kept for 2 years. And then benefits records should be kept for 1 year after a termination of an employee. And medical records, those can consist of any doctor's notes, physical exams, requests for reasonable accommodations, and then FMLA or Family Medical Leave Act documents. And those should be kept separate from your personnel records, and even in a locked and confidential area where only the people in your company that need to have access to them are allowed to be able to view them. Most of the documents should be kept for 1 year. That is with the exception of the FMLA documents. Those should be kept for 3 years after the employee's leave ends. So after they've finished their FMLA leave. Now, you want to make sure all of these, you know, I'm not just reading off these time frames and these records just to say, oh, here's 3 years. All of these record keeping requirements, they fall under different laws. You know, FMLA, the reasonable accommodations, that falls under the ADA, Americans with Discriminations Act. There's also the ADEA, Age Discrimination and Employment Act. Your timekeeping falls under FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act. You have some records that fall under the Department of Transportation. I did mention Americans with Disabilities Act. You also have the OSHA Act, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Family and Medical Leave Act I mentioned, the Immigration and Reform Control Act, which is our I-9 form. And then you also have HIPAA, which is what your medical forms fall under, and the reason why confidentiality is so important there. And that's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So all of these have a specific law that they fall under that dictates those required times.
Wow. Wow.
I told you, it's a whole webinar itself, right? I tried to sum it up as quickly as I could.
It is a whole webinar. And you know, the first thing that I have so many nuggets that came from that thought process that you just shared. The first thing I think about is, you know, that company owner who starts, you know, a window cleaning business or pressure washing business or even a massage therapist. And now it's almost like they have to have an HR degree or follow the right systems because there is so much to know. I love the fact that you also talked about independent contractors, because from the gig economy to, you know, seasonality, there are situations where it does make sense to have both. And I love that you called that out. That's really powerful. So, you know, help me understand when we think about, you know, the amount of time on average, how much time realistically can a business owner save if they switch to an online tool like HR Direct Smart Apps? And I have to say, you know, with my audience, I like to give away business candy. You know, it's a term that I think it's fun because it's about this idea. Is there like cool resources that are just, they almost taste like candy, right? They're so sweet, they're so yummy, you want some. And when I first had a chance to look at your site, I was so excited because you give away a business candy. You actually give away a free app, employee records, I believe. And I was blown away. I shared it with my audience and I said, business candy, everyone. And it was really a nice way to, for me personally, to get introduced to your company and also share so many valuable ways. Because sometimes we're afraid. We're afraid of, you know, it sounds really ridiculous, but we're so used to this manual process. We're saying, all right, Jaime, it sounds good, but you know what? It's working for me. So give us the numbers. If I was to switch, I'm a business owner. If I was to switch, you know, how much time can you save me?
You know, it's kind of like what you said, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But that's not true. And, you know, when it comes to all of the opportunities and the applications that are out there, if you're an HR person and you're attending a trade show like SHRM or anything, you are a kid in a candy store at that point, because there are so many great things. And I love that analogy you used because that just made me think of it. There are just so many opportunities out there and so many different applications that you could use to improve your processes in your business, to make sure, one, you're compliant, to make sure that you're more efficient. And now you're focused on your business and your business growing versus doing everything else. But everybody always goes back to, why do I need to worry about that? Why do I need to change? It's working for me. It has always worked for me. And that's great. It may be working for you, but let's stay with the times. Let's continue to, move forward, and let's stay up with the times, and let's create more efficiency for you in your business so you can help it grow. Now, it is hard to provide an exact amount of time, especially not looking at a specific business, but online tools like HR Direct Smart Apps, it provides those efficiencies that I was talking about, especially for small business owners that are juggling the multiple roles within one company. They're playing HR, they're doing the hiring, they're doing the actual work for their clients. They're going out to get more clients. So they're doing the sales part of it too. And the efficiencies that they provide, it's not just like, oh, well, I know that all my records are in one area. It's that they provide a streamlined process for handling things like tracking attendance, managing time off requests, and even dealing with discipline issues. For one, everything is in one area. Two, you don't have to be on your own network to retrieve it. So if you're traveling, you can access it anywhere as long as you have internet access. Three, you don't have to remember notes. You're not sending yourself emails. You can keep everything in that one spot, and it keeps track of everything that you're doing. So you only have one area to go back and check. I just picture, and I've been in offices where I walk in and I'm like, what's going on here? And it's sticky note haven. That's what I call it, because so-and-so called in at 7:30, and then I have a message here and a message here. Okay, so you probably are able to gather everything and finally do that. But if you don't have to do that, then you're going to, one, save yourself time from having to gather all of that information at once. And then two, now input it. Everything goes into the system at once. And it also, in some of the apps, puts onus on your employees to do that themselves. So instead of you going in to put their time off, they're going in to do it themselves. So now all you're doing is approving it. You're not marking off the dates that they want. They're doing it themselves. So you now put the onus on the employees, especially when it comes to even updating their own information. So when that employee calls you because they moved 3 times in 1 year, they can go in and update their address themselves. That doesn't take away those 5, 10, 15 minutes, which all of that time adds up very quickly for a small business owner. If you're spending, 5 or 10, I would say probably 5 to 10 hours a week on just management on things like that, think about if you were able to cut that time in half because you had a more streamlined process and something that was more efficient to go into one place and do everything all at once, you're gaining how many hours over a month? That's close to 20 hours a month at least, that now you can focus on just your business. And as it does take some time to learn those systems, but then you get to a point where you're not even doing it necessarily every day, but it's something that you have more on your schedule to say, okay, I know everything's up to date, so I can spend a little time doing this. And you're spending now 80% of your time focusing on your business and 20% on the managing of it versus the opposite.
I love this so much for so many reasons. So one of the things I am privileged to do is I am part of an organization called Conquer. We help thousands and thousands of business owners around the country in the home service industry, essentially, next level their business. And the biggest thing they say to me all the time, I don't have time, Kedma. I don't have time. You know what I say, Jamie?
Mm-hmm.
Say, well, I don't know about you. I was given 24 hours in a day. I don't know how many hours. Did you get 12 hours? Because I only got 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that they have time, but they're working on things that they shouldn't be working on yep. because they haven't systemized it. Mm-hmm. And when you said right now, it's getting your time back. That's what we all want. Mm-hmm. We want to be more efficient, and that is so powerful. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'm curious about, though, is as we continue to take on responsibilities as owners, I'm always worried about the risk. I'm very risk sensitive, probably because of my training, and I come from cybersecurity background, and so risk is a big deal for me. So what kind of risks do business owners expose themselves to when they actually do use manual processes to manage HR? And actually, you had mentioned something that I didn't even know, that if you don't get rid of, certain paperwork past mm-hmm. the time, you could be held liable. I mean, that alone is business candy
Mhm.
that thank you for sharing, because I did not know. So could you walk us through a little bit of the risks that we need to be aware of?
Sure. It kind of goes back to, if it's not broke, don't fix it. That's what business owners have been doing for years and years and years. So what's the risk in it if that's what they've been doing, right? Well, it's
Mhm.
all about efficiency. It's all about new laws coming out. It's all about the complicatedness that the government adds to the complexity of owning a business. And that's where the businesses have to revolutionize themselves, and they have to move along with the best way in order to maintain that compliance and stay up. So the important thing is, even though businesses have been using those manual processes for ages, is they're not foolproof, and they have never been foolproof. There are many risks that businesses expose themselves to when they continue to do the same thing, without moving to, more efficient and streamlined processes, especially as their businesses grow. Um, and obviously using apps that are online, using apps that are based or backed by in-house employment attorneys that are compliant, and software and online applications, those HR next generation pieces that basically take those typical mom and pop shops from their paper process to the electronic process. They were developed specifically to assist those businesses with streamlining their processes and help them to create a more foolproof system. Even though, we can all agree nothing is completely 100% foolproof. At least that next generation way of HR, it has definitely improved the way, the capabilities of the HR professionals. And this, that may mean a lot more to larger businesses in the scale of things, and even corporations. But for small businesses, it just all goes back to getting their time back too, because those efficiencies and the streamlining of the processes, it creates time savings for them, and that's a major benefit to them. And when they're using a platform like HR Direct Smart Apps, that's backed by employment attorneys, so it's always compliant. They can rely on them to, rely on that platform to keep their business in compliance, for the apps that they utilize on the platform. So that's less for them to worry about there.
I love that. I have to tell you, I'm old school. And when I was first starting in business, I was always like looking at the good housekeeping seal of approval. It was like the stamp. And I
Yep.
feel like what you mentioned 2 or 3 times, it's like it's backed by the HR employment attorneys. I'm like, man, I almost feel more confident taking the app now. I'm like, this is backed. Like I could say this is actually backed by that. And that is such a powerful statement. Again, something that can resonate and give confidence
Mm-hmm.
to that business owner. So tell me, are there any situations where maybe there are some tasks that you would highly recommend small business owners or business owners in general should not do manually? You should say, no, don't do this, Kedma. Do not do that. What would those be so we could be aware of that?
All the small business owners that I talk to, when I'm at trade shows or presenting or anything, I can just picture them answering back to me already when I answer this question, because they're going to say, who's going to do it for me? And when are you going to help me do it? But my honest answer, with all of the different systems, the applications, and the software that's available today, I honestly say none. And the reason why is because of the risks. You have, again, for small businesses, I do understand that budget is an issue, but there are ways to find things that are affordable. You don't need, HR Direct Smart Apps is a great example where you only pay for what you need. When it comes to an HRIS system, I totally understand, because that's a corporation system. That's something large that you're going to get tons of bells and whistles. You're going to pay thousands and thousands of dollars just to implement, and then thousands of dollars to maintain. But HR Direct Smart Apps was built with a small business in mind. And we just deconstructed the HRIS system to say, hey, not every small business needs everything that's a bell and whistle on the HRIS system, but we know that we can piecemeal it and you can only buy what you need. So there are affordable options out there. And you don't want to be doing attendance tracking manually or dealing with time off requests manually, because it just leaves too much room for error. And the other reason I say that is because we're in times today where the government allows a lot of room for employee rights. And they really push employees to understand what their rights are when it comes to what they're able to do, what you need to do as an employer. And with those people, especially ambulance chasers that are pushing for employee rights and all that kind of stuff, that leaves the avenue for the employees to have more understanding about, this is what you need to provide me as an employer. So employers need to be on top of their game today to make sure that they're in the right frame of mind and that they're compliant with what they're doing, so that if an employee does question them at any time, they can come back and say, no, I know that I'm doing the right thing because I have this system who's backed by attorneys and I'm compliant, or whatever, or they have an attorney on retainer, whatever the case is, whatever their business can afford. However, they have to make sure. And you're seeing it a lot more nowadays than you were back in the day, because employees back in the day, you saw loyalty. People stayed with businesses for 20, 30 years. Now you have people, moving from job to job and switching careers. So you don't have necessarily that trust factor, but people are also saying that, what's the best for me? So when they want to understand their rights, they want to know what they deserve, and they want to make sure that they're getting that. So they're the ones that are out there looking for that, versus, kind of just sitting back saying, I trust this company, they're reputable, nothing's going to happen. So a very different world that we're in today. And that's why I say none, because there are just way too many options that businesses, while you might have to do the research to find the one that fits your business, but there is a way for you to make sure that you can find something that works for your business.
I want to just speak real quickly on that, on affordability, because, I'm an author, nationally recognized author on target funding. So anybody who knows me knows I'm all about the deal, right? Getting things affordable. And I have to be honest, when I started learning about your company and sharing it, this is what the reaction was. First of all, people who were not using apps were surprised, and they said, why is it so affordable, Kedma? Like, I literally got emails saying, what, under $100 a year per app? Okay, too good to be true. So tell me what I need to know. And so we don't realize that there are solutions out there that are truly affordable. Why? Because we're busy. Mm-hmm. We're busy doing business, and we're not looking and having those navigators out there. So first of all, thank you. And yes, I agree. It is absolutely affordable, but you have to take the leap. You have to say, am I willing to take the leap and make my changes? Last question before we close, most important question, given the pandemic, I've been doing this for 20 years, and this is the first time in history as a business expert that, I've seen real situations that have, changed how business is being done. So are there any particular apps or tools that we need to be utilizing as business owners right now, given the pandemic, given that so many businesses right now are going online? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know, or is it, the same apps? So what are your thoughts?
I would say specifically right now, 3 very important apps that businesses could check out that would definitely be a plus for them to implement if they don't have them already, or if they're doing manual and they want to move online, especially with the pandemic. Businesses at the last minute have had to drop things and say, I'm sorry, you're working remote tomorrow. And these are people that have worked in businesses for years and years. They're used to getting up Monday through Friday, going to report to an office, where now they have to work from home. So that's a change for the employee at the same time, not just for the employer. And there's a difference there when it comes to how you're handling and managing those employees. One of the apps is the time off request. We know there's been laws that have been coming out. A lot of businesses have had to furlough their employees. Employees are taking longer, terms of leave absences now, because either their families have gotten sick, they're caring for elderly, they've gotten sick themselves, or they just have to care for their kids because schools are out, there's no daycare, different things like that. So there's a lot of different circumstances where you're having a lot more employees and businesses take time off. And you want to make sure, especially for these laws, For instance, I'll mention one of them. It's the FFCRA, which is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. That law, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, that has allowed businesses to, or employees to get a certain amount of time of leave, and it's a paid leave. So businesses have to pay that employee while they're on the FFCRA leave. But the good thing about it is that those businesses can get credits towards their taxes after. But the important thing is they have to make sure that they keep strict record keeping, and they have all of that leave for those employees documented upon that. So the time off request would allow them to document, okay, this employee requested FFCRA leave. I know they're on from this time and this time. So when it comes time for them to go and file their taxes for the year, they can report all that information to whoever they're filing their taxes to say, I had this many number of employees that were on FFCRA leave. They can make sure that they get those number of credits back. We know that's going to be so important to small businesses, especially due to the closings. If they had to close for a certain amount of time, the revenue that they lost. So those credits are going to be majorly important. And the only way they're going to receive them is if they have the proper documentation. So that's one way. Attendance tracking. Again, going back to the number of employees that are in and out, that's a super simple way to keep track. You can create your own codes in there. So you can create something that's specific to the COVID pandemic. That way you know who was out, who was on leave, who's coming back, all that kind of stuff. So it keeps everything streamlined. And it's not something you have to implement and create. It's already there and set in place. And the last one I want to mention is the company policies. People think, oh my gosh, you're talking about company policies. We're in a pandemic. Okay, so company policies right now are so important right now because one, they talk about employees' rights and they talk about your policies as a company. When you're moving remotely, you need to have standards as a company at the same time. So a remote work policy, a temporary remote work policy. So your employees know what their expectations are when they go to move to work remotely. The other one is the FFCRA policy. That was a mandatory policy issued by the government that every company had to implement and send to their employees. Did they do that? If they had the company policies, they would have been notified, this is a new policy that you must implement and send to all of your employees. So that Company Policies Act keeps them up to date on the new policies that are coming out that are mandatory for their state, because it is a state specific policy as well. So while, we are in the pandemic, there are a lot of things that start to get sidelined based on the importance of what's happening now. I'm worried about making sure my employees are okay and my business is maintaining and still making revenue. But at the same time, you can't let that compliance fall to the wayside. And these apps, because they are backed by our in-house employment attorneys, they allow for you not to have to worry about that, but we take that burden of making sure the companies are in compliance.
Woo, that was amazing. So one last thing, because we have to close. So, I always say people give away business candy, but I think you're running like a business candy store with all of your HR knowledge. There's so much there. Can you just let us know the best website? And I know we're going to interact, but for people listening, how to reach you?
Yes, they can actually check out, if they want to check out complyright.com. We have a ton of free information on there, anywhere from infographics to our webinars are also up there on demand if they want to check any of our webinars. We also have free tip sheets. And then also, if they want any more information about any of the apps that I talked about today, I know I've mentioned HR Direct Smart Apps quite a bit. They can just log on to www.hrdirectapps.com. The employee records is free, so go ahead and check it out, register, sign up, see how it feels, and then check out the other apps, and see what one fits you. You can always add more if you want, but you just get a feel on how it works and what the platform's like with the free record keeping. Can't hurt.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for so much wonderful information. I learned a lot, and I'm sure my audience is going to learn a lot. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. It's been a pleasure to speak with you again, Kedma.